Welcome to this Focus on Special. We are here at the Manufacturing Indaba in Sandton, where key stakeholders discuss and debate everything from the current state of the sector, financing for economic growth, even how best to position our manufacturers to take advantage of the African continental free trade area. I'm joined by Justin Smith, Head of Manufacturing, Retail and Business Banking, to talk to us about the manufacturing data, the output and the way forward. Justin, thank you for joining me. I want to lead with your view on our current state of the manufacturing sector in South Africa.
So, as we headed into this COVID pandemic, we already had a crisis in mind that we'd lived through. So the global financial crisis, we saw when that hit us about 10 years, lost years, where the manufacturers had to claw back that lost ground essentially. What we've seen through this crisis, where we've been surprised, is actually a lot of good data coming out in the last 6 months especially, where manufacturers have rebounded a lot stronger than most of us have thought. So in the first quarter, we saw the surprise in manufacturing data. We also saw that employment is going up. And then what we track is the ABSA Manufacturing PMI, Purchasing Manager Index. And that's been running at over 50 for many months now, which means manufacturers are seeing themselves expand. So really, it surprised a lot of us in spite of all the issues that everyone's facing, which I suppose we'll chat about. But it's been a good story for the first 5 months of this year, but we are keeping an eye out on where it's going.
On the back of that slight increase in the PMI, the data showed from April to May there's been a slight increase. Our GDP is also showing great performance. Do you think on all the external factors that South Africa is experiencing, we can maintain that?
So actually, interestingly, we've just released the ABSA Manufacturing Survey, which talks about the confidence, which talks about expectations for the next 12 months, and a lot of detail into what the current landscape looks like. So there are some changes in that data. So it's the first kind of piece of data that we've seen some of these strains, these supply chain shocks, these supply shocks globally coming through to manufacturers. So one of the points is that they were expecting higher exports, local sales in the first quarter of that confidence index being released. This quarter, they're saying, well, they're a bit nervous about that. So they're worried about, the Ukraine and Russia, the invasion there. They're worried about interest rates going up, and they know that, globally, as we try to get on top of inflation, that this will put pressure on GDP, our trading partners, even things like China, their shutdowns. That all impacts exports. But then when you look locally, they're also saying that they're worried about all the oil price increase. So the additional cost of them running their generators when there's load shedding, that puts strain on them, transporting these goods. And I think finally, what's it going to do to consumers? So for the first time in a little while, we've seen a lot more pressure show in some of our data, and manufacturers are worried about the next few quarters. So we do think it's going to be a tough kind of quarter or two ahead for manufacturers. Hopefully over the long term, the positive momentum carries on.
How is ABSA assisting the manufacturing sector to cushion that blow?
So we've tracked this over the last kind of 2 years, where we've seen this raw material shortage globally, shipping costs going up. All of that has been leading to this inflation where that it's difficult to get your inputs, and therefore pricing goes up. Just everyone feels it. So on that, we've worked with a lot of our clients to say, well, if there are raw material shortages, how do you buy more stock so that you, number one, don't lose sales, but also two, then you can kind of manage your margins and you don't always have to pass everything through to the end user. So we've seen a lot of that where manufacturers were always known for just in time, producing as you need it rather than stocking up all this inventory. We've seen a trend where a lot of people are saying, well, let's buy our raw material at a better price, and then we can manage our costs. So we have seen that slight change, and we try to work with our clients there to make sure that if they can stock up at the right place, they can, and ultimately then the end user benefits from that. Also seeing a lot of manufacturers say, well, we need to be more efficient with our energy. How do we invest in more machinery that it can produce a lot more efficiently than the old machines. So some of our clients, when they build these new machines, they use the same power, but they produce more goods. So again, that's good for cost competitiveness. It helps you produce at a cheaper rate. We've also seen some interesting things where through the supply chain crisis and the cost of importing going up, some of the manufacturers are saying, well, there's an opportunity for us to produce at a lower price than that international good. So it's constantly talking to them, seeing how as a funding partner we can assist their strategy and make sure that they're producing at a more competitive rate. And then the consumer gets the benefit in the end.
Now, the overall picture of our manufacturing data is looking quite good. However, some specific sectors in the manufacturer is outperforming the others. Where is the opportunity lie in increasing that?
So we think, we look at the entire sector, so all 10 subsectors. I mean, there's opportunities all of there, but where we do see a lot more kind of a changing story is an interesting one, textiles. We know the master plan's been adopted. We know that the big retailers are saying, well, we'll buy more local goods. We've also seen with shipping container costs, a lot of people used to export some of their goods, not beneficiated locally. Now are seeing the opportunity to do more manufacturing on those textiles products, as opposed to just, the B grade offcuts, sending it away. So textiles is someone that it's an industry that's shown good confidence throughout the crisis and really benefiting from, the new paradigm we're working with, but also a lot more focus from as a country saying, here's the master plan, here's how we work on kind of growing this industry as opposed to the previous kind of decade where it struggled. So that's been an interesting one. Automotive, we continue to see, there's been rules of engagement through the master plan, a lot of support to grow and build jobs. With all the new retooling from a lot of the OEMs, we've seen good opportunities there and a lot of growth. So we think automotive is still going to be a great kind of space for South Africa. And how do we adapt to this new environment where we're looking at electric vehicles and stay relevant globally? So I think it's going to continue to be an exciting space. Food and beverage is always kind of agro-processing, that subsector. We know how strong our agricultural sector is done. And agro-processors likewise, there's a lot of great opportunities there. And then finally, steel is one that we do a lot of focus on, so metals and that industry. And I think especially as we start seeing this investment into infrastructure, these manufacturers have lived through a very tough time, so there is a bit of survivorship bias, but really as we start seeing more investment into these renewable energy projects, into the ports, into rail, into general infrastructure, that's a subsector that can really kind of see the coefficient grow, and they can grow with the economy.
Some manufacturers are moving to get off the grids. What's ABSA's role in assisting the manufacturers to move on to that process?
Yeah, so we also focus on renewable energy and especially at your commercial and industrial scale. So we have a dedicated team that looks at renewables. We have a lot of close relationships with Eskom and we work a lot with them. We've actually seen a willingness for them to bring more energy onto the grid and support our clients that are investing in solar. So they don't see it as competition. They see this as kind of part of the solution to what we're dealing with. I think, so when we look at clients, we say, well, what do your bills look like? How much energy do you use? And can you find a solution that works for you? So they could just do it for the cost, and then it's all about solar panels and just saving cost. And it's actually a great investment for a lot of clients. We're seeing them break even on these investments as quick as 3 years sometimes. So it makes business sense for them to move that way. But the load shedding question, what we're seeing with manufacturers is actually most of these installations, they're integrating to their generator, because what's important to remember when you have solar panels, when it's load shedding, they don't work. You have to have a generator or batteries with it. So a lot of clients now are saying, well, let's integrate our generators, because they've got massive generators. And by having solar on the roof, it actually reduces your cost of diesel, because now you're pushing the solar power in and you using less diesel to run your machinery and your plant. So that's the other side. But then the battery story, we've seen battery prices come down quite a lot, and we talk to a lot of our clients to say, okay, where's that mix? When do you start investing in batteries? And we're actually seeing a lot of clients say, well, we'll use the solar and the diesel gensets, but we're going to start investing more and more in batteries, and it is making sense. So we've got quite a few manufacturers that have now started on the battery journey. They haven't gone fully off-grid, but as prices of energy go, as they run the generators more, they start putting more and more battery banks in. So there's quite a few nice examples, and it really gives you the stability of supply, which I think a lot of manufacturers are saying. They're saying it's not about the cost of kind of running things, it's the cost of losing production, losing that widget that I make, that's what they're really thinking about. So they really want the certainty, the supply being reliable, and we think this is a trend that's really going to continue growing in the next few years.
I'm now joined by John Molanda, Head of Transactional Banking Sales at ABSA, to bring us more clarity as to where our manufacturers lie within the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. John, thank you for joining me. Before we get to that, let's start from the beginning. There is still a big financing gap in this particular area in South Africa. Why? How do we reduce it, and for who?
Thanks for that. I think one barrier of the free trade agreement is the fact that there is this trade financing gap, right? I think the World Bank estimates it to be around $110 million. And what that means is there are businesses that are looking to do business in the continent to move goods back and forth, but they're not being funded. So that becomes, I think it's obvious why that's a problem. So the way in which we think about dealing with that problem is obviously that we would have to collaborate with development financial institutions to be able to make sure that as a bank we are augmenting our risk appetite and sharing risk with others. We've already done this actually in Kenya with the African Development Bank, and I think we're looking to see how we scale this particular effort.
Now, there are still fundamental challenges in regional integration. How do we overcome those kind of challenges?
Yeah, so the regional integration is quite key to making sure that the free trade agreement actually is operationalized. How do we get around the challenges? I think one step is making sure, one, we do need to deal with the funding gap. Second, I think we do need to make sure that we are investing in infrastructure. A big issue around manufacturing and moving goods in the continent is the lack of either rail infrastructure, road infrastructure to be able to actually move goods. So an investment in infrastructure becomes important. The other big issue is creating capacity to manufacture products, to add value to a particular value chain. So I think, just by way of example, the continent generally exports raw materials. So therefore you can see that there isn't a lot of manufacturing that happens. So we would need to enhance our ability to manufacture beyond the handful of countries in the continent that are actually currently manufacturing. So I think those have become the key things that we will need to do.
Now, I know the free trade area is still within its infancy phase, but is there any practical data that shows that there's been some kind of progress made?
Yeah. So look, I think definitely in the sense that firstly, the trade agreement is live, has been live from 2021. I think the act of having all these signatories there is an incredible milestone, because I think it shows the right kind of intent. The other one is the fact that we look at the Pan-African Payment Settlement System, which the big milestone there is there's been an agreement that there will be such a system, and I think development is already kicked off and it's at advanced stages. And this is significant because it fundamentally shifts and changes the way that trade and payments move in the continent. All of a sudden, when this system is live, there isn't a requirement for transactions to be dollar denominated, right? So that has a range of advantages. Firstly, our economies are susceptible to high FX changes, so that once your economy doesn't have that kind of dependency, that's important. So this ability to be able to do transactions in SEDI and Ghanaian SEDI and then change to a rand without having a dollar component is important, because it makes then the transaction a little bit more faster, which is good from a trade perspective.
Now, this ability to transact cross-border, from your perspective, is there increase in volume?
So I think in general we do see an increase in intra-Africa volume. So when we look at our books, right, we do see that the businesses are wanting to do business in Africa, and they are wanting to move goods between countries, and I think that is a good. I do think all the commentary and all the talk about AfCFTA is starting to shift the conversation in a different direction, and we're having a lot more interactions with customers around how can this happen. So we are seeing a little bit of the shift. Look, the problem persists, right? So the intra-Africa trade volumes in general remain low, and that's a problem. But I think there is a shift that's starting to happen in the right direction.
Now, part and parcel of the problem, from my understanding, is South Africa mainly exports to the SADC area. How do we overcome that barrier, and what opportunities lie within to go past that region?
Yeah, so I mean, I think addressing the barrier. So I think the first thing is making sure that we as a continent are operationalizing this free trade agreement, right? So because the biggest hurdle is the tariffs that companies have to pay to move goods, but even beyond that is some of the non-tariff barriers, right? Making sure there's actually efficiency in ports, that goods can move freely and people can move freely. So I think those are the things that we can do. I think it becomes obvious that South Africa has manufacturing capacity and manufacturing capability. So that becomes an obvious strength that we can use to be able to export goods at a much higher rate. And I suppose also to be able to transfer skills and capacity across the continent. So I think the manufacturing industry in general stands to benefit. I think industries also like agriculture stand to benefit, and I think there's opportunities there. Because I think what COVID-19 has taught us, and I suppose the conflict in Russia and Ukraine, says that there is a shift in global supply chains, and it probably makes sense that we look to an intra-African value chain to make sure that actually trade is sustainable.
And then, as ABSA, your role in assisting the sector, what is your particular role in this?
So I think our role is to make sure that we are able to fund particular transactions. I think we do that already. We have customers that are moving goods from South Africa to Kenya and vice versa, and we do fund those particular transactions. So, our role is to lend support to the sector, as we are already lending support. I mean, we're sponsoring this because we do see quite a lot of opportunity. And I think our role is to make sure that also we advocate for the right kind of conversations and the right kind of changes. So I think, at an industry level, supporting the PAP system is one proof point. So I think increasingly as we do more of those things, that stands to our benefit, and I suppose broadly to the benefit of the continent.
I'm joined by Rishay Rabipal, Head of Renewable Energy at ABSA, to speak to us about sustainable practices in the manufacturing sector. Rishay, thank you for joining me. Let's start with the trends for current manufacturers and new manufacturers when it comes to green technology.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, so recently what we've been seeing, especially from a manufacturing perspective, if you take in perspective where we're coming from, especially coming out of the year of pandemic, which was 2020, we then seen, especially down there in KZN as well as Gauteng, manufacturers were then hit with the unrest where a lot of looting took place, and recently with the flooding that took place in KZN. So from a confidence building perspective, they've really been taking quite a big beating. So a lot of our manufacturers want to get back to pre-COVID instances in terms of production as well as profits and margins. So we've seen a lot of clients try to look at reducing their operating costs. and in doing so, looking at energy efficiency practices to reduce that operating cost because it's something that they can control. And so we've seen a lot of our clients look at basically operational optimization, changing the way they traditionally did their manufacturing practices, and started looking at more sustainable operating methods.
Now, AfCFTA's involvement when it comes to the manufacturing sector is to help strategize and finance. What does that look like currently?
So we took a very different approach in terms of banking and how we support our clients, especially like to what I've just mentioned, building that confidence again in the sector and how we can reignite it. So our value proposition is very simple. When we look at clients, especially in the manufacturing sector, we understand the seasonality that they have, we understand their working capital needs, and we basically support innovative practices such as energy efficiency, renewable energy technologies, and helping them along with their journey. So we've taken a very simple approach such that we holistically solution our clients and we take a step back and we look at their utility accounts. We tend to look at their energy usage patterns and find efficient ways of how they can operate by suggesting ways of basically scheduling operation. We look at their utility accounts in terms of whether their bills are correct and whether they are on the correct tariffs, that is. And it's amazing in terms of many of our clients do not know that there's variable tariffs that can be looked at, either from a time of use or a flat rate. And those are the simple ways of basically reducing operating costs. Apart from that is we run awareness campaigns, helping staff and getting them more aware of energy usage and the impact it has on the client's bottom line. We then start looking at technologies from an efficient perspective and make basically recommendations of clients on how they can basically use more efficient technologies and the impact it has on their business. We then take the sustainable route in terms of reducing our clients' climate footprint or carbon footprint by suggesting renewable energy technologies as well as water efficient ways of practices such as grey water harvesting and reverse osmosis in terms of reducing their impact on resources required for their operation.
Now, on the back of that, the water efficiency that you're mentioning, Eastern Cape is heading towards day zero. What possible solutions currently exist for the manufacturers in that region?
Yeah, it is quite sad to mention that down there in Quebeca, we've just reached day zero, whereby a lot of the dams are almost basically there is no water. And we've had a very similar occurrence a few years back, where the Western Cape was in the same situation. So unfortunately, we've not been very proactive in terms of a nation, in terms of taking a lot of the lessons learned in Western Cape and implementing it around other regions in our country. But what we are seeing, many clients trying to become resilient to the impacts of what operations means without water. We're seeing aquifers being accessed in terms of boreholes being drilled to utilize that water. We've even seen technologies come out such as atmospheric water generators, especially on coastal lying areas where there's high humidity. And that type of technology basically absorbs the moisture in the air and generates water. Apart from that, we've seen desalination plants being proposed, whereby utilizing the water from the sea and desalinating it for more portable usage.
And then lastly, to wrap this conversation up, retail also have an involvement with manufacturing in terms of green procurement. What is that about?
So a lot of our manufacturers, apart from the challenges that they are having in terms of operational costs such as the electricity tariff increases, and then as a country we've got a constrained grid of electricity supply that's being load shedding, which has an impact on their operations. We're also seeing the shift, and that's been driven from government policy in terms of supporting environmental and sustainable practices such as our energy efficiency green paper that's out, whereby a lot of retailers are also jumping that bandwagon in terms of reducing the impact on climate. And so they are supporting manufacturers that also signs up to these practices. And hence, green procurement has become quite a key word in supporting manufacturers or suppliers that do have that element in terms of their operations, such as renewable energy technologies. And obviously solar has that and other technologies as well, but the most dominant being solar PV, reducing their carbon footprint, which then gives them that status of greening their operations.
There you have it. Regional integration and sustainable financing, two key components that can help drive growth in this sector. Until next time, goodbye.